Grapevines are not native to Australia. They were brought in by the first settlers in the late 1700s, and their first resting point would have been right here in the Botanical Gardens in Sydney. Now the irony is there are so many old vines in Australia that some of the clippings are in fact going back to Europe. That's how good they are. So this is where it started. Let's take a look at the journey of the vine in Australia and how it's reached out to all four corners. Many people view Shiraz as the quintessential Australian wine, and it's hard to argue against that. But there also seems to be a feeling that there's one particular style of Shiraz from this country, and that's not the case. So in this episode, we're going to look at all the different faces of Shiraz from this country. Now in Barossa, there are some of the oldest Shiraz vines in the world, and Yalumba's one of the most established wineries in Barossa. Let's talk history with winemaker, storyteller, Jane Ferrari.
South Australia was essentially the only free settled state. It didn't develop like a lot of the other parts of Australia, which developed as cities that just kind of evolved, towns and cities that evolved around a penal colony. We had a really enterprising member of the English landed gentry, a fellow by the name of George Fife Angus, who actually heard what was going on in Australia and got quite excited about the whole thing. They bought this land from the Crown, advertised it around Europe, around the British Empire, and they basically called it the South Australia Company. And people bought land off the plan. The valley floor was sold off to Silesian farmers, and they'd sent over their spiritual leader, Pastor Cavill, to see George Fife Angus, and he said, listen, we can't afford to buy the land straight up, but if you assist our passage, and if you let us buy the land hire purchase, we'll go as a town. We'll go as towns and actually make the land worth more money. And that's why in this region here, it started completely differently. Samuel Smith, a chap who's a qualified master brewer, decides, well, brave new world, Australia, great opportunities, we're going to go. And by day, he works as a gardener. By night, he plants fruit trees and wine grapes. And in 1849, we have our first vintage here. So in this particular part of the world, we have this viticultural treasure trove of pre-European phylloxera grapevines. It's not surprising, I guess, the two words Barossa and Shiraz have become synonymous. You've got French winemakers coming here saying, you know, you've got more light and shade with flavour and aroma with Shiraz and Grenache than we do back in the original regions, you know, that started these varieties. We had that whole European idea of pickling, preserving, that's completely different to the rest of the country. So there is this unique food culture. And it's taken 180 years to develop, so quite likely, you know, it's going to go on for another 180.
So with such a treasure trove of old vine Shiraz material planted in various corners of Australia, stands to reason that there's got to be a varied style of Shiraz coming out of this country, and you'd be absolutely right. And we're going to start here at Chateau Tarbilk, which is one of the oldest wineries in Victoria, established in 1860, and have made vintages every single year for 150 years. Let's have a chat with Alistair. Wow, Alistair, these are the original cellars, pretty much unchanged.
Yeah, this is the original underground cellar that was excavated in 1860, and the whole cellar is built from material off the property.
Okay, Alistair, if we've just walked through the old cellar, what's this then?
Well, this is the new cellar. This cellar was built by my great-grandfather's third cousin way back in 1875. So we have the old cellar in 1860, the new cellar in 1875.
Great, carrying on a nice long family tradition. It's fantastic. Lovely old cellar. What's the oldest bottle you've got down?
Well, the oldest red wine we've got is a 1948 Shiraz, and the oldest white wine is a 1953 Marsanne.
Still in good shape?
The 53 Marsanne's in great shape.
What have we got here? What's in the pile here?
This is a bin of our greatest wine. This is made from Shiraz vines planted in 1860, and we only make about 200 cases each year.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah. Sometimes you can play around a little, and we might be able to get one. There we go. It won't all collapse. So that's the wine. Yeah.
And that's from the original vines that were planted on the estate?
Yeah, the original vines. So we were established in 1860, our oldest underground cellar is 1860, our oldest Shiraz vines planted in 1860.
So that's got to be pretty close to some of the oldest Shiraz vines on the planet, never mind Australia.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Brilliant. Where's my corkscrew? For several hundred years, this has been the stopper of choice for the wine business, the cork. But the cork has some problems. It's been causing spoilage issues. So what does it mean to have a bottle of wine that has a cork taint? Generally, you're going to get this sort of strange, sort of musty, basementy kind of a smell to the wine, and it just won't taste proper. So what the industry's been doing has been experimenting with different forms of closure, if you like. And the best one right now, up to date, would be the screw cap. So whether it be red wine, white wine, or even dessert wine, if you see a screw cap on a bottle of wine, it means the producer cares about you getting the bottle of wine in the condition they intended it to. The other good thing is that the cork, you used to have to lie the bottle on its side to keep this moist and keep it sealed. You don't have to do that with these anymore. One of the most traditional wineries in Australia, certainly in Barossa Valley, is Rockford. And I'm thrilled to be able to sit with Robert O'Callaghan and get the history of Australian Shiraz and specifically how it relates to Barossa Valley. So Shiraz getting to Australia, give us the goods.
Well, we were lucky because in this state because it was settled by free settlers with an eye to commerce, and we live in a Mediterranean climate, and so they had to choose varieties from the old world. But luckily for us, they chose the south of France, and they proved to be very adaptable to the region. They planted the vineyards thrived, and luckily for us, a lot of those old vineyards are still here today.
Gosh, I'm thinking the German heritage makes me think of grilled sausages for this one. But
Yeah, well, I mean, the Barossa thing, as I say, I'm not native to the Barossa, but because I'm not native, I've always been fascinated by the place. But this is the only large European migration into Australia in that early period. Australia was set up by the Irish and the Scots and the English, with the exception of the Barossa, where a large group of Eastern Europeans came as a block, came as an organised community. They brought an entire community with them, and they set up here, and they were self-sufficient within a very short time, and they were organised, and so they very quickly built a really distinctive culture in the New World, and a wine culture. I mean, they would wine drink. they liked to drink, so...
Lucky for Barossa.
Yeah, very lucky for the Barossa. But they brought with them a work ethic and a cultural distinction that it's still influential today, but it's not dominant like it was when I first came here.
If you're going to sort of sum up the quintessential flavour of Barossa, which I know is probably not that easy, but what would you say about Barossa Shiraz?
I think one of the things that makes Barossa Shiraz different to elsewhere in Australia is how long we've been here. All those things to do with people in a region for a long time, there's kind of not much chance left in it. It's kind of evolved, and what makes old vineyards great is only the great ones survived. If they were no good, they got pulled out. I mean, if they didn't deliver flavour every year, they got axed. So the old vineyards that are left are the best of it.
No, because it seems to me, I mean, we talked earlier about modern, and you say no, you're about the most traditional winery, yet there's a modern sort of perception to me in this, and there's a richness and ripeness, but there's purity of fruit that runs right through the middle of this, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah, and that's got a bit to do, I think, with the way that we make our wine, because we, all the machinery at Rockwood's are at least 100 years old, some of it older. Everything's done by hand-picked, hand-pruned. Everything's soft, so you tend, I think, to be able to capture that really fine fruit. You never work in the fruit. You're never working the fruit that hard. I like to think that at the end of the day, that's what I've done. Each year I've used the warmth of the region to ripen the fruit, and then I've used the winemaking techniques to try and find that back. I think all the good Barossa wine is like that. In the cold regions, the poorly made wine is green and acidic and thin. In the warmer regions, the poorly made wine's too ripe, it's too jammy, it's a bit cooked. But the well-made wine in a warm region has the warmth, but it has a bit of fineness and a bit of elegance about it as well.
Well, cheers to Barossa Shiraz, because I tell you what, I'm a huge fan.
Cheers.
Thank you, cheers.
Okay. That's good.
Ooh, that's bloody delicious. Something I've always been fascinated by is this sort of sense of place in the great wines of the world. And what I mean by that is that how the grapes are affected by the environment around it. The French refer to this loosely as terroir, and to me that's something really fascinating. It's a flavour of a place. So Mike, we're standing in a place where you get your uncut Shiraz, and what do you think of the environmental factors here that shape or sort of inform the style of this wine?
Well, we've noticed over the last 5 years that I think the flavours have become more pronounced from the place where we're actually getting the fruit from. And this vintage is a classic example of, we've got the eucalypt trees behind us that are somewhere between 350 to 400 years old. The actual oil from the leaves goes onto the berries, right? And then the berries, and they come into the winery, they're fermented, but that eucalypt oil actually is still evident in this wine. Now that to me is showing the sense of place. Well, we are getting a characteristic from the soil, but even more so, we're getting a characteristic from the environment we're actually growing our grapes in.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's give that let me see if I'm getting some eucalyptus in here.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Look, I'm not looking for it to be the major characteristic, but I want it to be an underlying flavour, and if I wanted to take it out, I don't think I could. That's a part of what we're expressing in our region, right? So the wines are quite elevated, they're lifted, and this component, it introduces aromatics and also very fine acidity.
Yeah, no, and I like this nice sort of structural complexity to this. Fantastic stuff, Mike. This wine really does have some of that eucalyptus flavour, and it's absolutely delicious. Cheers, mate. Cheers. Cheers.
Excellent.
The reputation of McLaren Vale Shiraz is well documented, but to me the more interesting thing is why does Shiraz do so well in McLaren Vale? So I thought I'd have a chat with Simon White from Cork Vineyards. He's the winemaker here. Shiraz, why does it have such a long history and why is it so good from here?
I mean, I guess it's just the part of the world that we're in, but it's really about the soils, the air, the environment that you're in. Here in McLaren Vale, it's a kind of warm climate relative to perhaps some of the Northern Hemisphere places, which are much cooler, and Shiraz thrives in that warmth. We have a long history of planting grapes in this part of the world. This used to be a lot of mixed farms, but as part of that was always grapes. And so even back in the mid-1800s, we were planting varieties such as Shiraz. It's found its niche in the ground and in the world here in McLaren Vale.
If there was an overall sort of picture, how would you paint it for McLaren Vale Shiraz?
I guess the one thing that's fantastic about McLaren Vale is the mid-palate, the texture, and then just those concentrated grape flavours. They taste like the berries do in the vineyard. So things such as blackberry, blackcurrant, and then on top of that some nice leather and tar and spice.
Well, let's put that to the test. What have we got here?
We've got some 04 Lloyd, which comes from our 1919 vineyard. So planted in 1919, and basically it sits in its own little groove. We don't do much to it, we prune it, we irrigate it a little bit, but it basically grows whatever crop it grows, and it just makes this amazingly concentrated wine.
Oh, fantastic. Let's have a look at this and see about that McLaren Vale mid-palate. Oh, that's fantastic. Wow, that's got an incredibly intense character. Look at the colour, number one, but also that nose.
But the other thing about it is that it's soft and generous, easy to drink, but still having plenty of tannin to give it some length and life. McLaren Vale basically had grapes planted from the mid-1800s. A lot of the French varieties came here because the explorers from mainland Europe, and so we have lots of old vine Shiraz. So there's plenty of Shiraz and Grenache in the district that's in excess of 100, 120 years of age.
Seems you've got a bit of an Italian sort of theme going here as well as Shiraz. So what's behind that?
There's golden opportunities with things like Sangiovese, Neredavla, Fiano, to introduce varieties that are more suited to the climate and will naturally maintain things like acidity and allow us to be less interventionist in our winemaking. So effectively trying to get what's in the grape all the way to the bottle without me interfering.
But still 50% of your production's Shiraz, so clearly Shiraz is king in your mind.
Shiraz is king in McLaren Vale. I mean, Shiraz really is what McLaren Vale does best. You don't mess with them, you don't do anything, you just let them be, and they just produce this amazing, concentrated, complex, interesting fruit that turns into these great bottles of wine. We can stand in front of the rest of the world and say, well, here's the benchmark of a grape variety, and probably have a damn good argument, maybe even win.
Well, cheers to that. Certainly to McLaren Vale Shiraz, so cheers. So Stephen, these were planted when?
These were planted in 1860. So really when the settlement of South Australia was happening, there was a little village formed here. They had the church, they had their post office, their school, and old Nicholas Danitsky, who's a great-great-grandfather of mine, planted these vines then as a part of his farm and what have you, so they were pioneers.
Oh, that's fantastic. Look at it.
So you can see that they've been around for 5 generations. They're just amazing old vines, just fantastic structure and produced very small crops of just beautiful, delicious black fruit.
You haven't irrigated this vineyard ever?
No, these are dry grown. These rely on natural rainfall. We use organic and biodynamic practices to keep the soil health.
So obviously with this being the most sort of iconic wine in Australia, do you think it represents the flavour of what, say, Eden Valley Shiraz should be as compared to, say, Barossa, or?
It does. This region, Eden Valley, is very different to the Barossa. We're a couple hundred metres higher. It's wetter, colder climate. And the thing that actually makes it so distinctive is the continentality. And the continentality is caused by this mountain range that runs north-south. So that even during the summertime or autumn like it is now, as the grapes are ripening, we can get quite warm, sunny days like today, but overnight it will be wet and dewy, and it just keeps the purity of the fruit flavours there and keeps the nice acidity in the wines.
Now, do you think there's a quintessential Eden Valley flavour for Shiraz?
There is.
What is that?
It's almost like rubbing peppercorns and sage leaves together. So you get this lovely sort of spice, as well as the blue and black fruits that you get from Shiraz. You get this spice and herbaceous qualities of, positive characters.
No, that's fantastic. Makes me hungry actually thinking about it. These guys kind of take care of themselves in a way.
Yeah, they've been here for 150 years. All we do is prune them each year, and we leave a couple of buds as replacement buds, and from that then you get the shoots with the fruit on it. And you can see the black bunches hanging in here. But the colour, the amount of colour in the berries is phenomenal, and the flavour and intensity of fruit character.
So you're not really only just a viticulturist and winemaker, you're actually sort of a custodian of a piece of Australian heritage.
That's right.
That's fantastic.
We really feel like curators of a museum. It's just a beautiful old special bit of dirt, our sacred site.
Well, this discussion of peppercorn and sage has made me a little curious and thirsty. I think we should head out, don't you think?
Head off to the barrels? Why not?
See, I told you there's more to Australian Shiraz than you thought. They're not all monsters that jump out of the glass and slap you with oak fruit and alcohol. Australian Shiraz can be balanced and can be refined and layered with flavour. But it's hard to deny that lovely, warm generosity that most Australian Shiraz has. So here's to old vine heritage and diversity of this famous grape.